Previously, I discussed the question whether our life purpose is to seek knowledge or seek happiness. In this segment, I'll look at one of the biggest battles in philosophy between the rationalists, mostly mainland Europeans, who argue that knowledge is somewhat innate inside us, and the empiricists, mainly British, who argue that knowledge comes from experience. Immanuel Kant brought the two together. If Western philosophy was a two-sided funnel, Kant would be the narrow part. So everything before him is squeezed through him, and after him, Hegel and Schopenhauer moved philosophy in two different directions. Hegel went historical and rational, while Schopenhauer went psychological and subconscious. I'll discuss these two philosophical approaches later on. Rationalism is a school of philosophy that relies on human reason to understand the world. Reason itself is an innate human property. In other words, we're born with the ability to reason, and early rationalists saw reason as God-given gift. The father of rationalism is René Descartes, who lived between 1596 and 1650. He was a French philosopher and a scientist who famously did his thought experiment. He sat down in his armchair and asked the simple question: what if everything we know is just a dream? Nothing exists in reality. In other words, to prove that he existed, he did the opposite. He doubted his own existence. Then he said, if everything was a dream, the dreamer has to be real. Otherwise, there will be no dreaming without a dreamer, or doubt without a doubter. So he said the most famous line in philosophy: I think, therefore I am. Even if you doubt your own existence, this doubt is real. According to Descartes, we get knowledge or ideas in three different ways. Some come from our experience, some derived from reason, and some ideas are innate inside us, presumably from God. So rationalists like René Descartes argue that we have an innate knowledge of the world, and as we grow, we simply unfold that knowledge to see things more clearly. In a way, rationalists are like Plato in saying that our knowledge of the world inside us and learning is just recollection of that innate knowledge. So the seed is inside us, not outside. The other famous rationalist was Gottfried Leibniz, who lived between 1646 and 1716. Today we know him more because of the famous argument he had with Isaac Newton over the invention of calculus. Leibniz, however, was a great philosopher who made a distinction between rational truth and factual truth. In other words, our knowledge of the world relies on our innate reason, but also on human experience. The things we experience on the outside builds on and solidifies our inner knowledge. For Leibniz, the human mind is a small representation of the entire universe. In other words, the human mind contains everything in the universe. If the universe is rational, then the human mind is a representation of that rationality. However, he conceded that human rationality is not always adequate to understand the world, so we need human experience to complement our rational faculties. One of the biggest problems for Leibniz was his belief in God, so he attempted to reconcile scientific empiricism with the idea of God, who knows it all. In doing so, Leibniz argued for two different forms of truth. The empirical truths we get through experiences add to our rational truths which we innately have or God-given. So to sum up, rationalists argue that humans are naturally equipped to utilize reason to understand the world, with or without the need of observation or animal senses. In other words, we don't need experiences to know the world. We simply know it because, for the most part, God has imparted us with innate knowledge or ability of reasoning. Empiricists, however, disagreed, saying that we understand the world not innately but through experience and empirical data we gather from the world through our human senses. Our mind is a blank slate without experience. John Locke, who lived between 1632 and 1704, argued around the same time as Leibniz, was a pioneer of empiricism who said that everything we know about the world has come to us from our experience. He gave the example of newborn babies to show that we humans have not a single idea from birth. We simply learn by observing and experiencing things. Quote, if we attentively consider newborn children, we shall have little reason to think that they bring many ideas into the world with them. Locke understood that while we may not have innate ideas from birth, we do have the ability to learn a language, which may be innate. This was later developed by Noam Chomsky in his famous theory of universal grammar that humans are hardwired to learn a language and its structure. So John Locke concluded that all knowledge we gain through experience. David Hume, who lived between 1711 and 1776, built on John Locke's idea of empirical experience as a source of knowledge and further argued that not only we understand the world through observation experiences, but we're also able to categorize things as a kind of customary habit which guides us through life. Hume argues that if you see a tree, then another, at some point you see a pattern or category. This you call trees. We have no notion of trees from birth. We are like blank slates as babies, and only through encounters with the outside world we begin to form knowledge of the outside world. The same with night and day. As you see the cycle being repeated, you begin to expect it as a kind of custom that night turns into day and day turns into night, and the cycle becomes a customary knowledge. This over time becomes ideas and beliefs. Over time they turn into what rationalists call innate knowledge. Hume says they are nothing but old impressions or perceptions over time. As knowledge is passed on from generation to generation, it may seem innate, which is nothing but someone's experience. So David Hume added custom as a kind of repeated experience or common knowledge, and argued that we learn things from experience, it is not innate. So the rationalists believe we humans are equipped with some innate knowledge of the world at birth, while the empiricists argue that we are blank slates and only through our experiences we gain knowledge of the world. In other words, rationalists see knowledge flow from inside out, like a torch shedding light on the outside, while the empiricists see knowledge flow from outside like a window lighting a room. Here comes the German giant Immanuel Kant, who lived between 1724 and 1804. Kant took up the challenge of reconciling these two divergent schools of philosophy. To solve the problem between the rationalists and the empiricists, Kant devised a new theory that divided the world into two, phenomena and noumena. Phenomena is the world of experiences, how we understand the world through our bodily senses. Things we see, hear, touch and smell and observe and study. Noumena, on the other hand, is a world in itself, which we can never truly know. For example, we can touch and study a rock, but we cannot truly understand what it feels to be a rock. As a result, our knowledge of the rock is not complete, it's limited and partial. Kant argued that when we are receiving information through experience, however, we are not passive receivers. Instead, we humans also impose our own structures to the world. We categorize things into rocks, trees, animals, and whatnot. The world we see is a reflection of a mental structure we put out to the world. Rocks and trees may not have any notion of being such, but humans have imposed such categories onto them. In other words, we are not passive knowledge receivers, but actively imposing our own structure on things. Now Kant brings the rationalists and empiricists together. Rationalists argue everything is inside us, while empiricists say everything is outside us. And Kant says we are sort of on the threshold of outside and inside, like a kind of window glass in the middle of inside and outside. Our inner mental structure shapes how we experience the world. For example, a good analogy would be fishing. To catch a fish, a fisherman throws a net. If the holes in the net are too large, the fish escape. And if the net has no hole, it catches more water than fish. So the fish is the outside world, while the net we throw is our mental structure we put out to capture the experience as knowledge. We humans probe the world through our innate mental structure, which catches the outside experience-based knowledge. So for Kant, reason and experience go hand in hand in understanding the world. Without the net, you cannot catch. You need both reason and experience to understand the world. This he called his Copernican revolution. Why? Because in the Middle Ages, people believed the sun was orbiting the earth, and Copernicus said the earth is orbiting the sun. Kant did the same. Empiricists say knowledge comes from outside, and Kant says yes, but not only we actively seek the outside knowledge, but it also goes through us, so our mental structure determines reality on the outside. In other words, our human method puts a structure to the world that would not exist without humans. And this structure makes it easy for us to understand and manipulate the world. Imagine we're not human, we might have a very different understanding of the world. So to sum up, the rationalists think reason is more important than experience in our pursuit of knowledge. Our reason is like a torch that allows us to see things. The empiricists, however, counter-argue that experience is primary and reason is secondary. Our senses act like a window that lets light in so we understand things. Kant says we humans are both a torch and a window because our mental structure allows us to experience and understand the world better, faster, and more effectively. Without a good method or an effective tool and structure, our experiences are all over the place. The debate is still not over though. Despite Kant uniting the two epistemological approaches in philosophy, there are still people who think one way or another. Our modern science is leaning more to the empiricist camp, while most psychologists lean more towards not the rationalist, but the irrational subconscious or the unconscious in determining how we understand the world. So the debate has shifted from reason to passion, in some cases to intuition. It is not rationality, but intuition that allows us to understand the world. Next, I'll discuss what motivates human action by looking at two of Kant's famous successors, who went in different directions. Schopenhauer went psychologically towards Eastern philosophy, while Hegel built his philosophy on history. On the one hand, we have Hegel, Marx, Sartre, and others who explain human motivation through history and rationality, while on the other hand, Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche relied on individual psyche and human passion to explain human motivation.